Who are the most underrated players in early drafts? That and more this week on the couch. Dwain McFarland, PFF. Who are your underrated all-stars?
I'm going to give you one at each position, Sig. Like, we could do a lot of these, but I'll keep it to one at each position. So let's start at quarterback. For me at quarterback, there's really a group of players here. It's more about like where the other tiers and positions flatten. And I think you should just take an elite upside quarterback with the ability to run or throw. And the three players are Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. My specific pick is Kyler Murray. He's gotten better in every way, every year. I think if you were to ask yourself, who is the one quarterback in the league that, without having to stretch too far, if we had to pick one that you would say could throw for 5,000 yards and rush for 1,000, I think Kyler is the first person that would have to come to your mind. Obviously, he has to stay healthy. But Lamar has a baseline of 1,000 yards rushing, right? But 5,000 yards passing, probably not doable. Josh Allen, 5,000-yard passer, probably not going to get 1,000 yards rushing. Yeah, could score you 10 rushing touchdowns, right? So obviously we love Josh Allen. He's going before these guys. But to me, those are huge opportunities this year, specifically because of the way the other tiers are flattening out. Like, I could get Dalton Schultz, who I think, is going to have an increased role, but not an elite player, or I could take Kyler Murray. Like, Kyler Murray is how you break your league, not Dalton Schultz. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let's go with Murray. So I'm starting to do my projections. Hope to have them up by the end of the week. Although that's one of those tasks, like the more time you give it, the more time it takes. And Arizona alphabetically was one of the first teams you tackle. And I think I had Kyler around 5,000 passing yards, 4,700, definitely up. And the interesting thing to look at about the Cardinals from an environmental standpoint, Dwayne, is, this is like local to you, Jeff Gladney. Rest in peace. It was really sad to hear about what happened to him in the car accident, and he was trying to revive his career. However, it highlights that the Cardinals are going to roll out there Byron Murphy and Marco Wilson, and I'm not really sure. This is a team that has very little at cornerback, and they lost Chandler Jones in free agency. Marcus Golden can still play. This is a defense that is probably going to be very vulnerable against the pass. So that's an environmental factor that could really accelerate Murray's numbers. DeAndre Hopkins isn't going to be there for 6 games.
The thing is, last year you basically play with Hopkins hurt or gone.
That's fair.
He hurt his shoulder immediately. Basically, week 2 he hurt it. Played through it. And then comes back, gets the hamstring injury, ultimately ends up getting shut down. To me, last year, I think you kind of just have to throw, and DeAndre Hopkins could be approaching, he's at that age where he could be approaching a cliff, but we don't know for sure. Because to me, like when you look at his data from last year, you just kind of have to throw it out because we don't know really what he could do. He just wasn't healthy enough. But at the end of the day, I think even if he's gone 6 games and I know he can be healthy come week 7, like I still think you're getting more out of DeAndre Hopkins this year if you're Kyler Murray than what you got last year, assuming health, which we can't always assume. But then you add Hollywood Brown.
Exactly. And Brown, swapping out Brown for Kirk is at least
That's
a push.
An upgrade.
But it's probably an upgrade because of the familiarity, because of better speed. Now,
I think Hollywood can play inside or outside. He gives you scheme diversity, which means now you can get Rondell Moore onto the field into the slot as well, right? So I think the week 1, my projected starters, would be AJ Green playing for Hopkins, but you won't have Antoine Wesley out there. I think you'll have Marquise Brown outside, and I think you will have Rondell Moore in the slot. And then when you go to 10 personnel and you want Wesley out there, then you just kick Hollywood inside as well, right? And let he and Rondell Moore do their thing from the slot. You've got Zach Ertz, and then you also added Trey McBride. Not that McBride's going to see a lot of playing time, but to me, that's a good enough core group of weapons that also has depth, right? If one of them gets hurt, like there's still enough other guys that we feel decent about.
Yeah, and I think with Murray, the story has been that for a 6, 8, 10 week stretch, he's going to be QB1. and he's going to realize that ceiling that is making us talk about him right now. And then usually something's going to happen injury related. This comes back to why some people weren't comfortable with him as the number one quarterback, just because he's not big enough to handle. His body isn't really going to hold up the same way other quarterbacks' bodies might hold up. So maybe the idea is to draft Murray, look for that window, and offload him. But I still think the first thing comes to mind is that environmental factor where they could be in a lot of shootouts. Their defense could force Murray to play a more wild, freewheeling style. And that's one way to keep quarterback interesting in one quarterback leagues is shoot for that QB, the QB1. And I think you're right to look at him as the guy who has
and
that.
injuries are just tough, man. Like if Murray had already had one season under his belt where, the injury hadn't derailed him, which is totally within the range of outcomes, like of what could have already happened in his career. I don't think we can just say he's guaranteed every year just to fall off. Like if he had just had one season where that hadn't happened, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Like to me, he would be ranked right there with Josh Allen in the same tier, which is where I have him anyway. I have those two guys in their own tier. And then I've got Hurts and I've got Lamar Jackson, below that. I've got Justin Herbert in that tier, Patrick Mahomes in that tier, but I have Murray in the top tier. Like I obviously prefer Josh Allen, but Murray's next for me.
He's there, and his running involvement did scale back a little bit last year, but for the first half of the year, it didn't really keep him from having the big fantasy impact. So yeah, I think Murray's a guy to shoot for in that tier of quarterbacks who absolutely can outperform the players around him. Let's turn the page to running back. Who's your most underrated running back?
Yeah, right now, this is looking at ADP. I have it as Breece Hall. We just haven't seen him like bump up boards. Yes, we like Michael Carter. He was really good out of the backfield last year as a receiver, but he's a 4th-round pick. Breece Hall's an early 2nd-round pick that comes into the league with a pass catching and rushing profile, which is really, it's rare. It's hard to find. And so I'm not as worried about Carter as some people are. And ADP suggests people really aren't that worried about Carter either. Like he's dropping to like the 11th and 12th round now, but Breece Hall's still not moving up. So those are the kind of things I start to look for. Like, okay, so the market's softening on Michael Carter, but they're not sharpening right on Breece Hall. So like what's happening, with these two players. So not a huge fan of the Jets, but I think they've definitely made improvements on their offense. I do like the offensive coordinator. So I think it's a great fit for Breece Hall as far as being able to come in and run inside and wide zone. Wide zone was really the area he was the best in college. So just a lot of things lining up for Breece Hall. And right now you can get him in the 5th round still. So the other thing I think about at this time of year, Sig, if you're going to draft now, who are the players that are most likely to move up? And we know what happens with these young guys. You get one look at them in the preseason, and I mean, one long run will bump Breece Hall around in the preseason. We know how this works. Camp buzz alone could move him a half round. Mini camp buzz in the next week could move him a half round. So I feel like right now you're getting probably the best price you're going to get all off season for the services of a player like Breece Hall. I don't see his ADP going down. It could maybe stay the same, but most likely I see it moving up. It's only a matter of how far. We saw this with Jonathan Taylor and not to say he's the same profile as Taylor. We all loved Jonathan Taylor, but Jonathan Taylor started off in the 5th round and then ultimately, worked his way into the 3rd. Last year we saw Najee start off as a 3rd, 2nd, ultimately worked his way into the 1st round. Javonte didn't really move last year, but Melvin Gordon was just, I think a stiffer test than Michael Carter, right? Melvin Gordon, a guy that was proven. Also a former 1st-round pick, right? So just a guy that we had seen be a fantasy asset for multiple years. It can be really tough to move those veterans completely, out of a role. And so when I think people start, looking at all of this, like I just don't see a way that Breece Hall doesn't increase in ADP. Like my runner-up will be Travis Etienne, right? The Liz Frank is just enough because it's kind of a nasty list, of guys that have had Liz Frank. Now most of them never had it as young, right? As what we're seeing with a guy like Etienne. So he should probably be fine. But, pass catcher, explosive playmaker, like those, and you can get them both in the 5th round right now over on Underdog.
There's so much to sift through here. Okay. No, it's good. It's good because I mean, this should be how it's like in June. If you're a fantasy football person and you're listening to this show right now, then you have all kinds of things percolating in your brain. I was making the point on our show this week or last week, I think it was last Thursday, Dwain, that this is the time for you to really contemplate the range of outcomes and contemplate how the range of outcomes has changed. And as we get more information or as the summer goes on, we'll start committing more to the range within the range that we think the players will fall in, which really creates our draft strategy and our targets. But now it's more open-ended. And certainly, you brought up Travis Etienne. The whole Jacksonville offense is interesting just because of the Urban Meyer bounce, right? The post-Urban Meyer, ding dong, the witch is dead bounce. You say the same thing about the Giants. You should have a player on Jacksonville and on the Giants that you feel like is going to be the main beneficiary of actual competent offensive coaching and play. Somebody. It could be Saquon Barkley. It could be Kenny Golladay. It could be Kadarius Toney. It could be on the Jags. It could be ETN. It could be Marvin Jones. It could be Evan Ingram. There's a little Jags-Giants connection there. So we know this much. Both of those offenses bottomed out, and they're not going to be worse. So who's going to be the beneficiary? ETN's an interesting one, although here we go disrespecting James Robinson again. He's ahead of schedule in his Achilles recovery. James Robinson is like in the horror movie, like he's never actually dead, no matter how many times we want to put dirt on his grave. Going back to Breece Hall.
It was just such a late season injury for me. Like that's
sure.
The thing, and the thing that does it for me with ETN is the pass catching ability, right? Yeah. Knowing especially in a, just to clarify, in a PPR or a half, I like ETN far more than I like him in a standard format. Mm-hmm. But just, if he has some of the explosion, left, and I think he will, it may not be there immediately. The Liz Frank is not an easy injury to recover from. But I mean, ETN's already at 85 to 90%. And I know we had Cam Akers come back on that short turnaround, from the Achilles, and the Achilles is not quite the kiss of death that we used to think that it was. But at the same time, Akers was clearly not ready, right, when he came back. Right. So with Robinson, I think that will be interesting. I think the other thing is you've got a staff that has nothing invested really in Robinson. ETN at least is still tied to the front office, right? And so I'm yeah.
Is that a good thing?
I think it is from a playing time standpoint,
sure.
Right? You still got the first round draft capital, even if it was, from Urban Meyer and Balky, making a bad football move in NFL terms, right? We don't really care about that for fantasy. All we care is that we hope that he continues to be stubborn. He knows that he put a first round pick on him, and there's just, to your point, there's just opportunity in this offense, right? There's not a clear alpha on the Jaguars. So like, to me, this is going to be a spread out offense, but there's room for ETN to surprise us with a 15 to 20% target share, even if he only gets like 40 to 50% of the rushing attempts because James Robinson's ready.
Yeah, it's going to be the part that I don't totally see is who's the number one, or in the sense of if Christian Kirk is going to be facing up against Stephon Gilmore, Derek Stingley Jr., how does that make the offense go? I think I'm still gravitating back to Marvin Jones, but the point is, have a chip to put down. Laviska Shenault.
Always gravitate back to Marvin Jones
because he's just one of those. He's a true constant in fantasy football, especially with that red zone role. You glossed over, and it's okay to gloss over it. I want to go back to Breece Hall. You glossed over the biggest thing, of course, which is he's a Jet. He's a Jet. Now, you saw Mike LaFleur up there. Kind of, someone said he was smirking. I could see that, talking about how, hey, it's one ball. It's a good problem to have, right? Even Denzel Mims is generating some buzz now. But you have Elijah Moore. You have Garrett Wilson. You have Corey Davis. You have, I think Tyler Conklin's healthier than TJ Uzomah now. But, they've upgraded at tight end. They have Michael Carter, who's a fine player. We can say that, Dwain, just real quick, right? Sure. Michael Carter, hashtag good at football.
Hashtag good at football. Yeah. Had Breece Hall not been drafted to the Jets, you would be talking about Michael Carter as, probably a 6th round pick in drafts right now.
Yeah. Who had the chance to perform like a 2nd or 3rd round pick statistically. Yes. So we're really looking for, all this leads to one place, Dwain. It's Zach Wilson. Yep. What do you think about Zach Wilson? Is Zach Wilson going to get it? Is the light bulb going to turn on in year 2? Bulked up Zach Wilson. If that's the case, then there can be multiple overachievers in this offense. If the engine doesn't turn over, then it could be rough week to week. But as you said, Breece Hall, with his immense gifts and tools, has a chance to just change the conversation and make it about him and make them demand that they give him the touches to make him a big winner. But I'm going to make a lateral move from Breece Hall and say my most underrated running back is Kenneth Walker.
So I had Kenneth Walker next on my list,
Well,
and the thing is, like, his ADP is really good. Like, right now, you can get
gosh.
Kenneth Walker round 8, pick 5 over on Underdog.
Yeah,
like that's insane.
That's silly. That's just silly. Kenneth Walker, on theoretical value alone, should be a 5th or 6th round pick. And as you said, I think an overarching theme that might emerge from this show as we're going along, Dwain, is you're looking to take players that have seemingly inevitable developments coming that just haven't been priced in yet.
Right.
And this happens every year, right? Like even Rob Gronkowski right now, what are the chances Rob Gronkowski is going to play for the Bucks this year? 99.8% at this point. But still,
spoiler alert on my tight end right there.
Right.
Rob.
Yeah.
I draft Gronk every draft right now. Every draft I can. Like, he's starting to creep up a little bit, but even on Underdog right now, like, you can get him at pick 120.
Ridiculous.
Like, yeah.
Ridiculous.
I mean, he's tight end 12 off the board, which is the first thing people think of. They're like, okay, fine. I'm fine with him in tight end 12. I'm like, but it's not just that he's the 12th tight end going off. At pick 120, that allows you a lot of flexibility with things you can do, and you could still reach around on him right now and feel fine because all of the other things that would allow you to do with your roster, right?
He's going to level off once he actually signs the contract, which is going to happen. He's going to level off. What, Dwayne? Tight end 6, 7, like in the Dallas.
6 is where he belongs.
Yeah,
I would put him over Schultz just because I like Schultz, but not a high efficiency player, right? Really kind of a benefactor of volume.
Exactly.
And with Amari Cooper gone, like, that's definitely going to help. But I think you have to be really careful. A lesson I've learned in the last 3 to 4 years, and just really this year being my first true year to have a lot of time to spend looking, and digging deeper into, my own process. I'm always tweaking it, but just really with a critical eye. Where I was missing on certain players a lot of times was just overestimating their situation, and not letting talent, continue. I've always been a big talent guy because I play Dynasty, but I think I was starting to underrate it just a little bit too much, over in redraft. So I've kind of recalibrated myself now. All the tiers and everything I put out now on PFF, I give people my whole process. Like, I show you, okay, here's the player's ability to generate targets. These are the data points that tell us they can do this, right? Here's what they can do with the ball in their hands after they get a target, or the areas of the field that they can attack, right, and get targets. Is it everywhere, or is it Juju underneath 5 yards, right? I mean, are they a diverse player? Then taking into account the offense they play for, the competition, the quality. So, like, how many wins does Vegas have projected? Where's their quarterback ADP at? You just mentioned the Jets. Like, so just going back to Breece Hall really quickly, if Breece Hall did not have a receiving profile, he would probably be like, he would have like a 7th round grade for me. But because he has a receiving profile, meaning if the Jets aren't good and they're playing catch up and things don't work out the way their coaching staff wants, because here's the thing, like, the Jets, if everything went well, they would be a balanced team. They would use a lot of play action. They would run the ball plenty, just like what the 49ers do. And then, they would try to win with efficiency. But if all of a sudden you're trailing by 14 in the first quarter every game, that doesn't always work out, right? You've got to abandon that. You're just forced to start passing the ball more. And so what I like about Breece Hall right now is because of his receiving profile, even if that plays out, like, I still feel good about him. So that kind of offsets the fact that we're dealing with Zach Wilson, which is an unknown. It also offsets the fact that we're dealing with a team, right now. I mean, let's be honest, like, over on DraftKings today, they're projected for 5.5 wins on the season. In a 17-game season, that's not good. So we don't think the Jets are going to be good. But here's the thing. If the Jets, if we thought they were a 10-win team, and this quarterback was Tom Brady, Breece Hall would be ranked in my top 12. Like, so all these things are now, I'm trying to do a better job of factoring these things in, but not overweighting any just one of them. And what's interesting about it, Sig, like, as I start, like, and people can check them out, like, the tiers are all up. I do this for every position except quarterback. And it's like a heat map. You can see it, talent versus situation, how sharp the market actually already is, how sharp ADP, people aren't thinking necessarily, I don't think about all of these things that I'm doing in the same way I'm doing them, or they're not, I don't want to say they're not thinking about them. They're not charting them out the way I am, but intuitively people are already accounting for
Mm-hmm.
these things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's amazing like how efficient ADP really already is. And I think ADP we can use more than ever now because people have so much more skin in the game early because of best ball.
Yeah.
You know, people have sunk thousands of dollars already. Like there are people I know that already have 10 grand in best ball leagues. We're not even into June. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like the data that we have is just so much better. I know that's kind of that's like a
No.
tangent, but I know that's what we do here. We chase tangents. But I
Yeah.
had to come back to the Breece Hall and the Jets. If he did not have the receiving profile, same thing for ETN. The Jags are projected to win 6 games. We don't really know about Trevor Lawrence. Like we think, yes, he's going to take a step forward. He's got that really early first round draft capital. But if ETN did not have the pass catching ability, he and Breece Hall, and I think that Sig, come full circle here, is why Kenneth Walker is ranking so much lower because he just didn't have the passing down pedigree. Doesn't mean he won't get it at the NFL, right? It's not an absolute.
Right.
But typically, if you didn't show it in college, you don't do it at the NFL level. We do get exceptions to that rule, to be very clear. You know, there's always an exception to the rule, but that's the difference. So I think in PPR and half PPR, Hall and ETN should be going probably a round of Kenneth Walker. If you're playing in a standard league, they should all be really close, to be honest. They should be probably, you know, within a round of one another. So those are the different things you have to look at too, based on your format, based on, you know, the style of league you're playing in. Like if you're on underdog, you just know the receivers are all going to go early and running backs get pushed down. You know, whereas if you're playing over in the Footballguys Players Championship on FFPC, those running backs are all going to go earlier. So just all things you have to account for.
And the bottom line is your draft plan should probably include one or both of Hall and Walker. You mentioned something about build flexibility and how getting Rob Gronkowski in the 100s helps your flexibility, as does whether it's Hall in the 5th round, Walker in the 8th. Probably by August, Dwain, that's going to be what Hall in the 3rd, Walker in the 5th. And these are things that aren't priced in yet. Things that aren't priced in yet, for instance, when has Rashad Penny been a meaningful obstacle to anybody's opportunity? Theoretically, he's there, but chances are something's going to happen. It already has happened. He already has a little tweak. But Hall and Walker, obviously, the organizations love these players. I mean, spending an early second round pick, mid second round pick on a running back is like spending a top 15 pick, basically, as far as the confidence. And they're both talented enough to totally take over the conversation and make the team say, well, and in the case of Seattle, I mean, that's the plan, right? I mean, the plan is for Walker to be the point of the spear. Maybe it's not the plan this year with them throwing $5 million or whatever they did at Penny, but I think counting on Penny is going to go the way it has gone. Make room for those rookie running backs. Maybe even James Cook. James Cook is fascinating. In the same way that Michael Carter just never really got a chance to take off last year.
Yeah,
but
he started to, and then he got dinged up.
Yes.
Right. But like his underlying receiving profile, you know, is borderline, like grades out just below like CMC, Alvin Kamara,
Yes.
like the true elites. But you know, he could still take a step forward. So I'll give you, you know, our buddy Matt Waldman likes to.
Yeah.
I love this saying, the trapdoor floor. The trapdoor floor for Breece Hall is that Michael Carter is such a good receiving back, despite the fact that Hall's been a good one. So think Antonio Gibson. Do any of us have any doubt that Antonio Gibson could be a good receiver out of the backfield? I don't think so. He played receiver in college. I think we're all good with the fact that he would probably be really good at that. But guess what? He just happened to land on a team that had J.D. McKissick, who also is he was a receiver in college as well. Right. And so the role for McKissick is to be the receiving back. So the trapdoor floor for Breece Hall is if all of a sudden we look up week 1 and Michael Carter is getting all of the 2-minute offense, all of the long down and distance stuff, which the Jets could easily be putting themselves into if Zach Wilson doesn't take a step forward. You've seen a lot of 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s. And if Breece Hall's not out there for those, there's no way he's going to pay. I mean, he's a 5th round ADP, so it's not terrible. But if that point, like that would be enough. If he starts creeping into the 3rd, I won't want to draft him as much. Right. But in the 5th, I'm much more willing to. But in the 3rd, like your margin for error becomes so much more narrow because of the concerns with the quarterback, the concerns with the team's, quality overall. And if that scenario plays out with Michael Carter just completely taking over the passing down work, that would be bad. You don't want to be the early down back on a bad team with a bad quarterback. You just don't get to play very much. And there's not an opportunity to score the touchdowns you need, down inside the 5, because the offense just isn't getting there. So, I mean, Hall, he comes with a risk, right? I think overall where he's priced right now, like it's like, I like him. I want to go ahead and get my exposure now. Because as he creeps up, like I will start to taper down how often I'm taking Breece Hall in drafts.
The difference is a third round pick. You really need to be playing your third round pick every week. I mean, your third round pick needs to be your fifth round pick. You can swing for some upside and risk maybe a player is inconsistent enough that you can't trust them week to week. That's why he fits there really quickly. Because I spent a lot of time looking at the schedule, Dwayne, because as much as we overlook this, how the first 3 or 4 weeks of the fantasy season goes dictates a lot. At least dictates early trade markets. It dictates maybe whether you take a player or you decide to let someone else take them and maybe try to buy them low. So real quick, this is going to be fun for the Jets in so much as it's fun to find out where you are. The Jets are starting off with an interesting scheduling quirk. The whole AFC North. They play the whole AFC North in the first 4 weeks. Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. And then it's Miami, at Green Bay, at Denver, and then New England and Buffalo. So wow.
Yeah, so they're not going to start well. Like Breece Hall really needs to own the passing down role. If he doesn't, it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, and just we'll find out where the Jets are in year 2. I am one that gets exuberant. We just talked about Miami playing the Jets. Miami and Mike McDaniel's another good example of this offense has had 6 offensive coordinators in the last 5 years. Things should get better. Maybe it's year 2. Maybe it's whenever Lamar Jackson is the Miami Dolphins quarterback in 2025. Maybe it's not right away, but we can certainly forecast in some improvement in efficiency in the running game, some improvement in efficiency in the passing game, adding in Tyreek Hill and so on. And again, you're trying to catch that stuff that as we get closer to the season, the market that, as you said, ADP is pretty efficient at this point, partially because the people that are establishing it are the early drafting sharps.
They're hardcore.
Yeah, they're hardcore. I forget who it was that just put something out there, Dwayne, that basically the later drafted teams were more successful overall in underdog.
Yeah, Jack Miller over at Establish the Run did that. Hayden Winks has done some similar work. There's been a lot of people touch on it, but Jack's article, it's something that I've noticed, like, because I play a lot of big tournaments, redraft, and I have for years, and I've finished, I've nearly taken down some really big prizes. Like I finished in the top 5 multiple times at the Footballguys Players Championship, some stuff over at FFPC. But I've always noticed this, like it's easier to draft at the end, even though everyone else is caught up on the information. And the reason why, one, you've got the most recent information, but it's not necessarily an advantage, right? Because everyone does. But against someone that drafted 3 months ago, it could be, because a lot of times what will happen is you draft now, and there are advantages to drafting now. What you're trying to do is take advantage of someone that you think is going to move up in ADP, but then you also have to avoid the landmine of losing like one of your top 3 picks to an injury, right? In a camp, injury. And so there's the give and take. But the later that you draft, the other thing that happens is the common drafter now is in the draft room with you. It's like if I go to Vegas and sit down to play poker, like the saying is, like, if you don't know like who the worst player at the table is within like 10 minutes, it's you. And so you don't want to be the worst player at the table. So if you're drafting now, there's a chance, that you are, because of what you just said. A lot of people they're drafting now, they're really sharp. They're consuming a lot, and the content has gotten so much better. We think a lot more about strategy now in fantasy football, right? Not just player takes. So the players are sharper than ever. They're more aggressive than ever. And it's a situation where, as you get later and later in the season, that becomes diluted because everyone gets excited about fantasy, and now everyone is in the fantasy football pool, and it just makes it easier to draft value. And you'll have certain players that may fall to you, some different things like that. Not to say that just means every draft you're going to be in later in the season becomes easier. It's just the odds become easier, because now when you go into a draft right now, you're probably 9 out of 12 people are super serious about fantasy football, like all the time. Right. By the time you get to August, and this is no knock on, anyone that doesn't like to think about fantasy until August. I think we've all been there, but what it means is you probably have 3 people in your draft with you that are have been serious about fantasy football all season. You've got another 9 that are just now like getting their feet wet. So that obviously just the experience alone, if you've been drafting and then other people haven't, like it gives you an edge in these big contests.
Yeah, interesting ways that people are actually figuring out how to measure and quantify these things that we intuitively, we either may grasp or maybe counterintuitive, but there's hard data. You mentioned Cam Akers. Before we turn the page to wide receiver, I just want you to touch on Akers, because Akers is a riddle to me. Akers is one where I believe, Dwain, the ADP reflects the uncertainty among the fantasy community about him, because I think you can make a case that Cam Akers should be a second round pick. It's the Rams. I mean, he's going to be like the drain that all this value created by the Rams offense is going to go down, right? I mean, he's probably going to get goal line carries.
Hopefully it's not a drain, like
right
down the drain. But
when I say a drain, what I mean is it's like all these different things are going to be happening and everything's going to trickle down and he's going to get to finish drives. What I'm trying to say is with Akers, I think we all understand that what we saw at the end of the year when his efficiency was not the Akers we're going to see this year. I think that the running game that Sean McVay has created to keep defenses off balance was not able to be used last year with Sonny Michel. There was a much more no-nonsense downhill running game, and Cam Akers gives them all the versatility, a healthy Cam Akers. He is a good receiver out of the backfield. But also, how are you going to defend this offense? How are you going to defend this offense? Cam Akers is probably not going to be the player that you go out and say, well, we're not going to let Cam Akers beat us today if Matthew Stafford's going to throw the ball to you. No, it's going to be the opposite. Cam Akers is going to, I think you're seeing more and more, Dwain, league-wide trends where defenses want teams to run the ball. They would prefer that teams run the ball. They're putting light boxes out there and saying, we prefer that you run the ball than if we leave ourselves vulnerable to these big passing plays downfield. But at the same time, the vision of Akers not performing well at the end of the season is still there. Akers has never actually delivered on his promise, so it's still speculative. Which way would you nudge people on the more pessimistic or optimistic side on Akers?
I'm slightly more pessimistic, but I also get the bull case for him. Like it really is one where I can see it go either way. My biggest challenge for Akers is just that when Darrell Henderson is healthy, and now we also have Kyron Williams, who we know can be a passing down back. We've seen Sean McVay in the past flirt with the idea of really having this passing down role. And so he's kind of going back to the well. Now, it was not an early draft pick, so it's not like something I think we've got to be super concerned with. But my biggest concern for Cam Akers is that he just gets slotted in as the early down guy. And we saw that happen. We've seen that happen with him in the past where he just didn't get the passing down role. And so that's my biggest concern. But the Rams offense is so good with where you're getting him, even if he doesn't have the full passing down role, like if he's healthy and really playing well, like he could score 15 touchdowns.
Exactly.
you know, so that's the trade-off, you know. So if the Rams continue to play well, and he continues to be the guy to get the work inside the 5, which he's really been, and with Sonny Michel gone, like that's probably a lock for him, you know, at this point, over Darrell Henderson. So I think there's an upside, you know, and a downside for Akers. My biggest thing is I'm shyer on him in PPR. I'm less shy about Akers in half PPR, and in standard leagues, I'm fine with Cam Akers. Yeah. So it's kind of I've got a scale.
Again, though, whether it's the rookies we've talked about or Akers, there are running backs out there. Even I think James Conner is usually available outside of the top 2 rounds. You can do your build and get a running back 2 with running back 1 upside outside of the top 2 rounds. So it gives you more flexibility. All right. Turning the page to wide receiver, who is your most underrated or the one you most want to talk about today at wide receiver?
Yeah, so I've kind of went with the younger guys, right, on the other positions. So here, like for me, it's really about like Michael Thomas. And look, there's the injury concern with Thomas, you know, but like right now, it sounds like everything is on schedule. He's going to be back. And right now, again, it's ADP, right? Looking at Michael Thomas at ADP, what's going to happen when we receive word that he's at practice? Like his ADP is going to go up. His ADP right now has already been slipping. He's in FFPC drafts. He's in the 7th round now. Over on Underdog, a little more receiver heavy. He's going in the 6th round. But that tells you something too. If you're on Underdog and you're going in the 6th round for his quickly, if any of you have done underdog drafts, like receivers are gone in a heartbeat, and people do not let off the accelerator. They just keep it fully pegged, on the receiver groups. So for me, it's just around at this point, Thomas's ADP has slid, about a round from where it was before. And I just feel like his ADP is very likely to move up. Now, we haven't seen him in 2 years, but when we last saw him, like, you just don't have many guys, Sig, that can really be a 30% target share type player.
Mhm.
Now, look, is Jameis going to be able to do the same things with, Thomas that we saw with Drew Brees, who was so great, right, in that underneath passing game where, they would put Thomas in motion, work him inside, let him run the slants and the digs against the safeties and the corners. I mean, the safeties and the linebackers, Jameis Snow is not as accurate, but that doesn't mean Thomas's profile as a receiver couldn't change a little bit, right? They obviously really slanted things that way to fit Drew Brees. And so I just look at him as being a player that, look, he's only going into year 7. He's still not 30 years old. He's had, he's shown multiple times that he can put up these 30% target share type numbers. It's just really hard to not want to go ahead and get some access to Michael Thomas now. I guess his ADP could also still go the other way, but I think it would have to be
a setback.
Yeah, it would have to be a setback. He would need to come back, and then something else would have to happen. And then at that point, he probably would start to slide, and you might just be off of him. But I feel like right now, if come training camp, like week 1, like he shows up and he's actually practicing, like I don't think there's a way that his ADP doesn't move up
third, fourth
round to 2 rounds.
3.
Yeah, it could be 3.
Well, again, you're thinking about range of outcomes. We already know the top end of the range of outcomes. Okay, maybe without Drew Brees, it's not the wide receiver 1, but a wide receiver 1. We already know that. And as you mentioned, it's easy. I think what's happening, like you mentioned, his ADP is dropping a little bit. I think there's just this sense with Thomas that's fair of we have no idea what we're going to get with him.
Yes.
Right? It's kind of how you feel about Kadarius Toney. Like, I have no idea what I'm going to get. However, we did see him briefly come back with Taysom Hill quarterback, and he was putting up like 9 for 100 kind of numbers. Now, Jarvis Landry has some overlap in his role. We're talking about in the chat room back in Southeast Louisiana, Lutcher, Louisiana, I think is where he's from. So that's great. Tyrann Matthews back, right? Like St. Aug, just about a mile away from here. Let's get the band back together down here in New Orleans. Great football culture here.
OBJ coming next, I guess.
Right? It has to be. It has to be either that or the Rams, or back to the Browns. So with Thomas, we know that top end range of outcomes is returning a second round value, and all he has to do is just get back to the player he was and have his head on straight. Maybe the mental.
And you're getting him as a wide receiver 3 right now. Is the key, right?
Well, and especially in a best ball where you can build in risk averse floor picks after him just in case he shank the pick.
Yeah.
Anyway,
totally agree. Yeah.
So in best ball, you should be much more open to those players with the higher end range of outcomes. And with Thomas, I think the other thing you're hitting on with the theme of the day here, Dwain, is it's going to be priced in once he's back at practice. He's going to jump up 1, 2, 3 rounds in ADP, and you can get out ahead of that. Even though the reason you can get out ahead of it is because people are very wary of Michael Thomas right now. But Jameis Winston looks good. I'll tell you who I'm going to bring up. I'll bring up 2. I mean, listeners of the show know about Courtland Sutton. I think that's where you want to put your chip in the Broncos pass offense. Anything you want to say on that?
No, I'm with you on Sutton. I've got him ahead of Jeudy at this point in my ranks. And the biggest thing is this. We know that the Broncos with Nathaniel Hackett, they're going to run 12 personnel. They're going to run 21 personnel, which means you're going to have a lot of times where only 2 wide receivers are going to be on the field. And in those scenarios, my concern with Jerry Jeudy, he's really been the slot guy. I don't know that it's not Courtland Sutton and Tim Patrick whenever they're in those formations. And so to really have the upside, of being, you just talked about the range of outcomes. Like if you really want to have any shot at being that big time wide receiver 1, like you need to be on the field for 85 to 90% of the time that your quarterback drops back to pass. And my concern right now with Jeudy is that number could be more like 70%. And I really like him and he's a great young player. But the thing we want to listen about for Jeudy in mini camps, training camp, those sort of things, is he getting to work outside? Because if all of a sudden he's going to play in the 2 wide sets, then I think they become interchangeable, right? And they could do that. They could say, okay, great. When we go to 11 personnel, which is 3 receivers, we're going to put Tim Patrick outside and kick Jerry Jeudy inside. But the other potential landmine for Jeudy is they also like KJ Hamler. And so there's a chance that they rotate KJ Hamler, with Jeudy as well. I guess there's a chance they just rotate all of these guys, Sig, right? It's just all of them being at like 80%, of the routes, and all of them playing outside, inside, everything. But if I had to put a chip down, I really think that Courtland Sutton's the most likely to be on the field all the time. I think he's a great fit with what Russell Wilson wants to do down the field with an efficient passing game. And I think the Broncos are really going to set that up with their run game. I think you're going to see a lot of play action. I think we're going to see the things that we hoped we would get to see with Russell Wilson last year, with the offensive coordinator change that just never really came true in Seattle.
The unknown upside. Again, the Denver offense, unknown upside is so exciting. And in a real simplistic way, Dwayne, part of the reason I'm so clear on Sutton is where you put your chip in this offense is because we've seen Sutton realize the best case scenario of himself on an NFL field already. We know that Sutton can summon up everything he has to be the best player that he can be. We haven't seen Jeudy do that yet. We haven't seen Jeudy realize his potential yet.
I think and for Jeudy, it's another tough one because he's battled the injuries. He's battled, obviously the really bad quarterback play. There's been a lot of things going on with it. But like, if you look at his underlying data points, which is something that I really like to look for players that have been in and out of the lineup, that have battled injuries, all that sort of stuff. Like his targets per route run, 21%, yards per route run, 1.85, both grayed out really at like borderline wide receiver 2 levels. So I've done this kind of study where I went back and I really looked at, looking at receivers at certain benchmarks, thresholds for wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, like what did these other data points tell us about them? And like, could we potentially find cases where maybe they had been a wide receiver 4 or a wide receiver 5, but these underlying data points were actually already screaming to us that these guys were going to be really great players one day? Or at least really good players. Great is a bit of a strong word because, not all of them are going to end up being great. And Jerry Jeudy's definitely on that list. My concern again with him is the playing time. And so like these data points found Hunter Renfrow way back when, before he was doing anything. It already said that Hunter Renfrow was probably going to have a wide receiver 2 season, right? It found these things with Deebo Samuel early on, saying he would probably have a wide receiver 1 season. It found it with Cooper Kupp before he was a wide receiver 4 2 years in a row. Year 3 blew up as a wide receiver 1. These underlying data points said that Kupp was already going to be a high-end wide receiver 2. So those are the positives with Jeudy. I think it's to me, though, the question is if you have to pick one, right? I do believe that it's Sutton. I'm not afraid of Jeudy. I do wish Judy's ADP would just calm down a tad because they go off the board right next to each other. At this point, Sutton has jumped Jeudy and ADP as well. So this isn't just you and me. This is really, I think at this point, this is public sentiment. The market is telling us that it is Sutton. Now, they're only 2 picks apart on Underdog, and they are 1 pick apart over on FFPC. So people are really close. And it's also one of those things where when one goes off the board, I think, everybody's like, well, go ahead and time to grab my Broncos. There goes Sutton. Let me grab Jeudy. So I think Jeudy still carries the potential to boom. I just want to hear, is he getting to play outside, in camp? And if that happens, then they become completely interchangeable to me.
So what does that kind of analysis say about the most polarizing player in fantasy football, Gabriel Davis?
I knew you were going to do this. Yeah. So with Gabe Davis, he does have an underlying data point, as far as his PFF wide receiver grade that does support the fact that he could have a really big season. Now, it's not as strong as what we've seen with Jeudy. So I actually did a whole article on this. If people want to go check it out, they can. But it's a 2-part article. The first part is how to find breakout receivers. So kind of how to fish. If you just want to do this for yourself, and maybe you get to the end and you read my analysis and you don't necessarily agree with it, but you like the framework that I built for you, and you can use it in your own way, right? And I share all the data and everything in the article so you can see it. But looking at, Gabriel Davis, he's not as strong as some of the other guys, but he definitely checks some boxes that people are ignoring. And so here's the other thing. Here's where these things get tricky, Sig. So like when you include his playoff data, and here's the first thing people will say, well, you can't do that because that's got the 4 touchdown game, blah, blah, blah. Well, do I need to go and remove T. Higgins' huge blow up game at the end of the regular season? Do I need to remove Jamar Chase's huge blow up game at the end of the season? Like, if we're going to do this for one player, in my opinion, you have to go remove every player's best game. And I don't think that's a good practice. But I think the underlying, part is like what you want to look for are the underlying data points. And so for Gabriel Davis, targets per route run of 18%, like that's really wide receiver 4 territory, not wide receiver 2, 3, 2, 1. But remember, what offense does Gabriel Davis play on? One of the most pass-happy offenses in the league with a really good quarterback. So last year, for example, we saw Mike Evans with an 18% targets per route run, Still finished as a wide receiver 1. Why? Because he played with a really good quarterback on an offense that continued to throw the ball a lot. And so what you have to remember with Gabe Davis is even if he doesn't take a step forward in his profile, let's say he just continues to be an 18% target per route player, but now all of a sudden gets to be on the field running a route 85% of the time, which honestly I don't see any way he can't do that this year. When I look at it, Jamison Crowder's a slot receiver. Khalil Shakir, slot receiver. Isaiah McKenzie, slot receiver. Tavon Austin, if he's going to play any kind of role, slot receiver. Right? It's. I don't see a scenario where Gabriel Davis can't be on the field playing outside receiver along with Stephon Diggs. And that alone, if Gabriel Davis is just out there for 85% of Buffalo's passing plays and doesn't take any step forward in his profile, he's still going to be a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside. Now, look, I was avoiding Gabriel Davis before the NFL draft because he is a fragile profile. If there were stronger competition on his team, it would scare me away from him. But he has just enough in his underlying profile. And then when you stack on that he gets to play in the Bills, you can't ignore that. And that's what's funny. The way I've built out my tiers now is to count for all these things. But what's interesting when what happens like on Twitter and things like that is we end up in these battles, right? Where people are like, well, the talent says he can't do it. And then someone else will say, well, the situation says that they can. Like, really, those two things come together to make the profile. And so with Gabe Davis, I don't think you can ignore either. He carries risk with where you're going to have to take him. His ADP now, he's wide receiver 29 on FFPC, wide receiver 25 on Underdog. That's creeping into wide receiver 2 territory. There's definitely risk if you want to take Gabe Davis in the top 24. And the Bills' schedule down the stretch is pushing him up in best ball. Stacking him with Josh Allen pushes him up in best ball. There's a lot of reasons he's getting steamed beyond just the fact it's not just necessarily everybody saying that he's going to go bonkers. Like, these team constructions people are building are also playing a factor in how his ADP is playing out over in best ball. But I definitely want exposure to him, even at those prices, because again, so the next question is, Sig, what if he actually is good and his profile says he could take this step? And what if all of a sudden he becomes a 22% target per route player? Yes. If he does that and he's on the field for 90% of the Bills' routes, he will be about wide receiver 18, maybe better. And if he took a step past that, like, you're talking about a potential wide receiver 1 profile. So the thing I like with Gabe Davis, if he just doesn't do anything, I still think at a minimum you're getting a wide receiver 3. He still has an ability to face plant from there, but if he takes any kind of step forward, it could be really big. And just to share with everyone, from the time he took the starter rollover last year, so it was like week 14, and if we look at it through the playoffs, he was actually earning a 21% target per route run and a 21% target share over that period. The period where he was the full-time starter, not just getting 30% of the snaps, playing in 10 personnel. Once he took over the starting role last year for the Bills, he actually already kind of accomplished, those numbers that we would want to see that would actually make him, a mid wide receiver 2. So I'm comfortable with him at this point. I get why people want to fade him. Like, if I were to read the list of comps to you, I don't have them right in front of me. It's like a 50-50 list. There's people like Devin.
But how many of those comps were in a good offense with a good quarterback? That's the key.
Exactly.
That's
the key. It does matter. You can't overweight it, but at the same time, you can't completely dismiss it, especially when you look at the rest of the Bills' offense.
Yeah.
And look, guys, Dawson Knox last year, he's a player I like, but his targets per route run are not good. Dawson Knox was much more carried by the volume of the offense than Gabe Davis was.
Yeah.
People like Dawson Knox in fantasy, but they don't like Gabe Davis. And so that's the part that's weird to me. It's like it's the same kind of thing, but Gabe Davis actually has a stronger receiver profile than Dawson Knox does tight end.
And one of the things I like about what you did is you kept saying, if he takes a step forward.
Well, I did that just for you, Sig, because I know you're glass half full always.
And you should be. I wrote an article a while back on how optimism helps you as a fantasy player. Yes. And I think if you're not willing to be optimistic at all, it's going to hurt you in the long run. You have to get over exuberant about players, because oftentimes when you're over exuberant, you realize you were even conservative about that player. It's that feeling. It's that thing that makes you want to stand up out of your seat. And the thing about Gabriel Davis, it should keep the fun in fantasy football, right? The thing about Gabriel Davis, as you said, if he takes a step forward here in year 3, which used to be the conventional wisdom, year 3 is when a receiver really starts to become the player he's going to become in the NFL. But everything the Bills have done this offseason indicates they believe he's taking a step forward. And this is a
Yeah.
competent organization. So
Projected
anyway,
for 11.5 wins. Josh
Yeah.
Allen is the number one. Don't take it from me or Sig.
Yeah.
ADP says he's the number one quarterback. The market tells you
Right.
he's the number one quarterback. Yeah, there are between the tight ends and the receivers, there are, two other options going in the top 36 at wide receiver or tight end or the top 12 tight ends, which is another thing I look at. But it doesn't matter whenever you're on the offense I have them projected for the third most dropbacks per game in the NFL.
And
so
it's going to be an aggressive too, trying to make plays. All right, real quick, I just want to do a really quick lightning round before we go off the rails, because we were lavishing some Gabriel Davis stuff. Real quick, okay? And also, a valid answer is none of the above. Avoid, okay? One chip on the Chiefs' offense.
Sky Moore.
Ooh. It's a Pittsburgh native.
I mean, obviously Travis Kelce is the chip, but we're talking
sure,
about
but I mean at ADP, it's all weight adjusted, right? Like pound for pound.
Yeah.
Cost adjusted. One chip in the Green Bay offense.
I'm still gonna go with Christian Watson.
Ooh, see, we got rookie optimism. There's some optimism for you. The unknown upside, the allure of the.
Can I hit on it just real quickly?
Yeah, please.
So in the study I just talked about, Alan Lazard, Marquise Valdez-Scantling didn't hit any of the marks that you want to see. And I just feel like at this point, they are what they are. Juju's the wild card, but at his ADP, like I'm just not crazy about it because his underlying data points have basically fallen off a cliff since his 2018 season. All the things that would tell us he's this really great receiver. Plus, no one in the NFL wanting to give him a contract. I know he was hurt last year, but he wasn't hurt the year before. There are a lot of things with Juju's profile that are off, despite the fact that he's already given us a wide receiver 1 finish. He's given us 2 of them, right? He's also given us a wide receiver 2 finish in his career. So Juju is a guy that I don't want to be completely barren on. So he could come through, but at the ADP, to me, just because the other guys, the profiles don't look good, it's like, give me Sky Moore. And one little tidbit on Sky Moore. So I did a study on all the rookie receivers coming into the NFL. And basically what I did is looked at them on the routes the NFL uses the most. So all of the routes the NFL teams use 7% or more of the time. So I just called them staple routes in the NFL. And they essentially make up 60% of the passing tree. When you look at Sky Moore, he ranked as the top wide receiver coming out in college in staple routes, which means to me, like, he's basically NFL ready. You can play him outside. You can play him inside. Now, could he struggle with press coverage? Could other things happen? He played against lower competition. Yes, but he checks enough boxes. Plus the Chiefs pulled the trigger on him. That's why I put my chip on Sky Moore.
Justin Ross returns to form. No, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot to sort out. Right? That would be great to see. There's a lot to sort out there. I actually am gravitating more to Clyde Edwards-Helaire just because of the price.
CEH is the other one. Yeah, for sure.
Just because
round 7, pick 5.
Oh man, that's just silly. That's silly, guys.
I've been taking him more and more. My exposure has shot up over the last 2 weeks. Yeah,
and it's interesting too when you look at, okay, as a rookie, the optimism got him into the first round. All right, it didn't go as planned. In his second year, what was he, a 3rd round pick last year? And we find out that he had that gallbladder issue, and it makes sense that maybe he just wasn't himself. This year, with
and was battling a knee injury that he picked up in the preseason.
Yeah, so and now it drops even more. He's still, I mean, this could be the year that he really is the leading fantasy scorer, other than.
And I think you can make an argument, like Siggs, the easiest way to transform this offense with Tyreek Hill gone, and we've seen Andy Reid do it in the past.
Yeah.
Like, so let's say some of these receivers can't win. Like, let's say the data on MVS is actually accurate, and he's probably just what he is. Field stretcher's going to score some points, but not be great. Let's say Juju's on the way down. And let's say Sky Moore's a rookie that can't come through. What is the other easiest way to generate targets in an offense? Is behind the line of scrimmage to the running backs. And Andy Reid, we have seen in the past, be a master in the screen game. Brian Westbrook, we saw him do it with Jamal Charles, with the Chiefs back in the day. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for CEH. He has not looked good in his underlying metrics, but I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass for the reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah, and in a similar note, in Green Bay, really quick, I'll just say, now he's priced correctly, but he still can greatly exceed it. Aaron Jones.
Yes.
But the answer is Aaron Jones in the sense of what's
And
Aaron
now he's a
Rodgers going to do.
second.
Now he's
Jones
a
was a
second round pick
third.
who can
He's
be
a
a
second
first,
rounder now.
right? Who
Yes.
can still finish the first round. Okay, we just got like 5 minutes off the rails, but that's okay because we're just relaxing, enjoying ourselves. It's summertime. We were mentioning vacations before we went on the air. We headed back to Michigan again. It's great. It's going to line up with a fish show at Pine Knob, a grand old shed. Going to go to Lou Whitaker retired number ceremony. It's awesome. Always love my time in Michigan. Favorite vacation spot?
Oh, we have two, but we love Destin in the summer, and then we love to go to Purgatory, in the winter. Like, so we kind of we like to do the snow, we like to do the beach, but the kids, like, they love the beach, man. They love going to the beach. So, and my dad's going for the first time. He's never gone to check out Destin. So my dad and my mom are going. My brother's going. He's taking his 3 kids. And so we're going. We're taking our 3 kids. So we just have this big, huge house that we have rented. It's just past Destin a little bit. And so we're super excited. We'll have 2 of the golf carts. We've got all the food and live music all around us. So, and we're going for a week. Like, it's an absolute blast. Anybody that's not been down into that area, like, water's beautiful, sand is beautiful. There's culture. The people are friendly. We love it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good old beach communities on that part of the Gulf Coast. They're still not that different than they were 50 years ago or 75 years ago. And that's nice. It's still more of a small town kind of village feel, not a beach resort overdone feel. And yeah, the Gulf Coast, I'm going to stand for the Gulf Coast. I'm living down here in Southeast Louisiana now, and it is its own culture, really. The Gulf Coast is its own culture, a little bit separate from the states that comprise it: Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. And then back to the mountains. It's funny because the beach, I was not necessarily a beach person. And my wife, love of my life, we started going to her family's timeshare they had out in Del Mar. And that's a whole other North County, San Diego beaches are amazing. And you can just walk right down to them, and they're regular.
So whenever I used to be a regional manager for a medical device company back in the day, in a different life, Sig, and I had that area. Oh my God. Like, yeah, beautiful. Like, I had the West Coast. Like, I didn't have San Francisco, but pretty much like everything, south of that, like, was in my region. And man, just so many pretty places, but San Diego was just amazing.
Yeah, it is. And I got it. I had that epiphany at the beach because it's the beach, right? I mean, it's where the land meets the water. It's the sands of the hourglass, right? And it's like a spa. I've said that you could just spend a day at the beach and probably charge $300 in a spa treatment, right? You have your what is it, like, the sand like scrubs off the dead skin cells, the salt water's good. I have this like too much information, right? Like, I joke that I have, like, my body has like its own ecosystem where, I mean, maybe there's a little rash in my armpit that's like something I'm not quite sure what it is. I did finally got an antifungal cream for it. Okay. My point is, maybe I scratch in certain areas that I should just not scratch and like put some sort of topical cream on it or something like that. Really too much information. My point is that go in the salt water, all that stuff clears up, right? You're sun-kissed, like, you look healthier, you look younger just going to the beach. And I really kind of had my aha moment, the sound of the water. And everyone should get to a beach this summer if they can. Even if you can't, you can go to the beach in your mind. And then there's the mountains and everything wonderful in between. That's always what we get to touch on every time we talk to Dwain McFarland. Me, follow him on Twitter, follow him at PFF, everything that's going on. Real quick, Dwain, I'm just going to spring this on you last second here, like 30 seconds or less. Do you have anything to tell us about all 22?
No, I don't.
It's because I know
I haven't.
PFF grades.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. So I
You've
mean,
heard about it. You're familiar with it.
Yeah. We promote them on the podcast. I just haven't done any of the all 22 league stuff. Like, it looks super interesting. I've just been so engrossed, like, in working on rankings and tiers and team profiles and previews. Like, I haven't had a chance to dig into it.
Oh, totally. No, it occurs to me because we're talking about PFF, and I like the new frontiers in fantasy football, the new frontiers in putting all your knowledge to the test. But you're going to get the knowledge you need always from the very deliberate, erudite takes of one Dwain McFarland, and we love all the folks over at PFF. We love everything that PFF has done to elevate the conversations we have here on the couch every week, folks. Thanks everybody for dropping in, for listening at Footballguys. We've got all kinds of things happening every day to feed your football fix, and we'll continue to get you through the summer. Make sure to take that vacation, folks. Dip your toes in the water again, even if it's just the beach in your mind. We all need that. And we all need time spent together, which we got to do today with Dwain and with all of you wonderful people. You're the best because you are so very classy.